Right. Yeah, so for all those attending, thank you very much. Yeah, again, for those packing away or leaving, if we can keep the noise down slightly, please, that'd be great. Right, so this afternoon is our annual drill training session. It's the fairly normal course, so you'll be hearing from myself. I'll be talking about tillage operations and the basics of drilling. And then Richard, who's also in the trials team at BBRO, will be talking through some of the physiology of sugar beet, and hopefully it will connect some of the dots between why we advise certain things and what that actually means for the crop and the biology that's driving that. And then once we've both done our pieces, we're very lucky to have 4 of the manufacturers here today, and we'll split up into 4 groups. And then we'll split out to the 4 manufacturers for 2 sessions, and then the third, we typically try and choose the one you want to speak to. I would encourage you to make the most of it. They're here purely to talk about sugar beet drilling today, so whether that's about maintenance or operation of a machine you already own, or potentially something that you're interested in changing to in the future, please do take advantage of that. I will hand over to Richard to do some of the physiology stuff, and then we'll pick back up.
Right, thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Richard. I've been at the BBRO nearly 6 years now. Big part of my job is drilling trials in the spring. So do a lot of drilling all over the beet growing area and a whole range of soil types. And spend a good bit of the spring on my hands and knees digging for seed, as I hope you all do when you're drilling. So we're just going to run through today a bit about what makes up sugar beet yield, a bit on germination and bolting, then run through establishment and seed rates, seed chemistry, and then just finish with a little bit about varieties. So this is a nice quote from the late Simon Bowen, who would have been stood up here a few years ago. He said that 70% of your yield is determined the minute the drill leaves the field. I think this still holds true today. So much of what happens to the life of the sugar beet crop is already decided when you're putting the seed in the ground. So we're really looking for the right variety, the right number of seeds, in the right place, and in the right soil conditions. So over the last 100 years, there's been a vast change and improvement in technology that's been available to us growing sugar beet. Thankfully, I'm far too young to remember the days of chopping out and hand singling, although we do still do a small amount in some of our trials. Right from the first precision drills through to today's modern machines as we see here. But I think a key thing to remember is that attention to detail is still so important. Right from the days of all those guys in the field, hand singling every plant, through to today, one person sitting on a drill covering hundreds of acres. That attention to detail is still key. So moving on to physiology. A massive part of what makes up sugar beet yield is the amount of sunlight that the crop captures. So the yellow bars on here just show the amount of sunlight available in every month. So as you'd expect, May, June, July have the most available sunlight. And then the green bars show the amount of light that a normal beet crop will intercept. So we are obviously trying to get as much of the light as we can in July and August. You could say, well, why don't we drill the crop earlier and try and make the most of that light in May and June? But that's mainly down to bolting. So then the graph on the right, you can see there's a very strong relationship between yield in tonnes a hectare and the amount of sunlight that's intercepted. So it really is an important part that makes up sugar beet yield. So moving on to leaf area index. So this is how we measure the amount of green canopy, which is how the beet plants actually capture the sunlight. So we're looking for a target leaf area index of 3. So that means every metre of ground, you're looking for 3 metres squared a leaf. And we're trying to target this by the 3rd week of June. So what can we do to try and maximise our leaf area index by June? So the first thing is speed of germination and emergence. So looking at your seed bed quality. This might be you or might be one of your colleagues on the farm, how good your seed bed is, if there's moisture available. And emergence, so if you've got the right drilling depth. And then plant population. We're trying to make sure we've got every plant where we want it, so there aren't any gaps of bare soil. So again, a lot of that is down to you as a drill operator, making sure you've got the right seed rate, the seed is well covered, for example, at the right depth. And then rate of canopy expansion. How can we make the canopy grow quickly to get as much of that light as we can in June? And then finally, canopy duration. What makes that leaf area stay as we go in through the season? So looking at things like fungicides to try and keep the crop green. So a big thing with sugar beet, it might sound obvious, but compared to cereals, sugar beet doesn't tiller. So everywhere you drill a seed, you're only ever going to get one beet plant. So if you've got big gaps, the beet can't compensate for that. So yes, if there's a gap, you might get a larger sugar beet root grow where it's not surrounded by other beet, but that just makes it more difficult at harvest. You'll find the sides, as I'm sure you've all seen, the sides of the root get sliced off in the harvester. They're hard to scalp. So we're really trying to avoid that if we can and not have too many gaps. So moving on to germination and bolting. So germination, it might sound obvious, but we need water uptake, warmth and oxygen. So when the soil temperature is below 3 degrees, there's not going to be any germination at all, and it's going to be very slow below 5 degrees. So really we're looking for a soil temperature of above 5 consistently before we think about drilling. And again, it might sound obvious, but germination happens below the surface as soon as that seed cracks. So if you're going around and you think your plants are starting to emerge, you scrap down and you can just find a root. The seed has germinated, but the root goes down first, so you won't find your leaves straight away. So moisture at drilling, coming back to your seed bed. Seed that's been drilled into a dry seed bed can remain viable for a long time and just sit there waiting for moisture. But seed that's in a seed bed where there's just enough moisture to germinate, the seed germinates and starts. If it then runs out of moisture, it'll run out of steam. That seedling is then likely to die. But conversely, if you've got a dry seed bed, those plants that have waited for moisture, as you can see here, we've got a sort of a leaf, sort of 4 true leaves. They're little tiny cotyledon. We've got split emergence. And that's just a pain for herbicides because you've always got to work to your smallest plants. And again, it makes it hard at harvest for scalping and a consistent crop going in the harvester. So we really want to avoid this if we can. So soil temperature drilling, as I said before, we're looking for consistently above 5 degrees over a few days. So the video here, if we were drilling at Rougham a few years ago in the snow, so we got caught out. But actually, and there was snow and we were drilling, I was quite glad to be in the tractor cab with the heater on and not sat on the back of the drill. But actually, the soil temperature was high enough that actually we had a very good crop in that field and good establishment. So it is important to go out and check your soil temperature rather than just look at the forecast and think about air temperature. So you can either just go out with a soil thermometer, stick it in your field and just get a reading, or there's a whole range of options on the internet. So we've got on our website, our own network of weather stations. They've all got soil temperature probes, so you can look on there at the nearest one to you. Or there's various other options, Farmer's Guide, Germain's. There's loads if you just have a look on the internet. So bolting. So I'm sure we've all seen bolters in the field. We've all had fun in August pulling them out on hot days. So bolting is when the beet plant runs to seed in the first year. And it's due to vernalization, which is a cold snap or a cold period that the seed suffers. So temperatures for that, anything between 3 to 12 degrees, sort of over a long period. So obviously, early drilling increases the risk of that, and also cold soils and wet soils. So just thinking about when we start drilling, looking at the forecast, just checking your soil temperature is consistent. Because besides having to pull bolters, that'll obviously cause a problem in future years if they're left to seed. There'll be a lot of weed beet the next time you grow sugar beet, beside the obvious yield loss from a bolter. So going on about bolting, what else can you do as a drill operator? So you might not get a choice of the varieties you've got to drill, but when your seed turns up on farm, just check on the recommended list and try and organise your boxes. So if you've got any that have got a red cross beside them, that means they're not suitable for sowing before the 16th of March. Or if you're growing conviso, a purple cross. So when your seed turns up and it's in the shed, just try and segregate it into suitable for early drilling and not. And just think about if you are going out drilling in the first half of March, try to drill your varieties that don't have crosses first. So typical drilling dates, this varies a lot each season. As you can see, there's a whole range of dates here. But any time from the 1st of March, if the conditions are suitable, you could go drilling. So again, just checking with soil temperature and the long range forecast, thinking this week looks good, but if there's going to be a cold snap forecast the week after, is it worth going drilling, or are you better just to wait a little bit longer? Conversely, after the 10th of April, you're quite likely to get a yield loss, so just think once you sort of get into April, if you think it might be good to go, then think about making a start. So establishment and seed rate. So what we're looking for here is 100,000 plants a hectare established on average. So you're never going to get exactly 100,000 plants in every hectare. Every field is different and the soil within the field is different. So just try and get an average over your field. So if you want to go out, it's a really good idea if you're the drill operator to go back and do the establishment counts so you can see for yourself how you've got on. So we would recommend waiting until the 6 leaf stage, because by this point it's pretty reliable that plant is going to survive through and make a sugar beet plant. So there's no point going out when they're tiny seedlings, because you might still lose a few at that point. So seed rates, if you look on our website, we've got some handy tables. So you can look based on your typical establishment rate, and then whether you're on 45 centimetre rows or 50s. So every farm and situation is different, and you'll probably know if you've gone out and done some establishment counts in previous years what your typical average establishment is. But if you're not sure, or you're on a different farm or drilling for another customer, so you can use 80% as a benchmark. So establishment, when you go out to do your establishment counts, it's quite simple. If you're on 50 centimetre row widths, just mark 20 metres and count the number of plants and then multiply it by 1,000. Or if you're on 45 centimetre rows, do a 22 metre long row. And then ideally do it sort of 10 times over each field. And don't just pick the good bits. Try and pick, if you know there's a bit of the field where it's heavier or cobblier or a different soil type, try and do some counts in there as well so you really know what's actually going on. So I'm not going to read all these out. There's a whole list of different things that can affect establishment. So some you can control, some you can't. So things like moisture in the seed bed, whether it's you or one of your colleagues, Stephen will come on to this with cultivation shortly. And then things like drilling depth are obviously down to you. Any compaction of the seed bed, again, linked to cultivations. And then George will always want me to mention soil pH. So it might not be your responsibility, but just try and check that your soil pH is correct before you start. And also seed storage. So if you've got over-yeared seed, just try and store it so it's frost-free and dry. Don't just sort of chuck it in the corner of a shed and forget about it. So then seed chemistry. Almost all the seed in the UK is treated with tachygarin. So that's a fungicide for seedling diseases. You can see along the bottom here. And then also Force ST, the majority of UK seeds also treated with this. So for the soil pest complex, springtails, millipedes, pygmy beetles, things like that. And then the last thing I want to say about varieties, please make a note, either write down on your phone, in the tractor screen, on a notepad, what varieties you've drilled in each field and where, and try and keep them separate. We label about 8,000 plots individually each year, so hopefully you can all manage to do your fields. It's just so helpful. If you have a problem with germination, you think there's a problem with the seed, then it helps us or the seed breeder if we're trying to work out what the problem is or if there's an issue. And also, at the other end, when it comes to harvest, if you've got a variety you think is doing very well, if you don't know where it is, it's hard to check that is doing well, and then you won't know what you want for the next year. And also, be aware of conviso. If you're drilling conviso and conventional, make sure they're separate and clean the drill completely out, because if you get any mix-ups, that's not going to be pretty. So just to summarise, it's better to drill later in good conditions than it is trying to force it in early. Check for the red and purple crosses on the boxes for early drilling. Target 100,000 plants, and please know where your varieties are drilled. Right, I'll now hand back to Stephen. Thank you.
What about temperature for the potting?
The bolting model is quite complicated, and obviously you can also have a devernalisation period as well. Do I know the numbers off the top of my head? I'll be honest, Mark, I don't, but we can follow up on that. But yeah, obviously aiming for that 5 degrees in soil above, you'll be, yeah, you can still get caught out with cold weather periods in April, but at some point you've got to make the call to go, haven't you? So hence the variety selection being so important. So. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, yeah, no, I agree. So obviously, as BBRO, we buy a lot of different seeds. So I've probably got 30 units, all different, sat in the store. And yeah, we germ test every one to make sure it's still viable to go out in the following season. So we've just sent ours off. The breeders offer a service, Germain's offer a service. Equally, you can do it yourselves on some tissue paper in the kitchen, bearing in mind the health and safety implications of that. But yeah, it can be done. So yeah, by all means, catch Germain's. There are services out there to make sure. And I would advise doing it, especially sometimes we'll end up with a second year going into a third year, and it can be quite a steep drop off as well in that situation. So, and also making sure you are storing it well. It's not in the back of a damp grain store somewhere sat in the cold. It wants to be in a heated store to make sure you stay within them thresholds. So any new seed should be 90% or above, but equally I would expect it to be in that high 97s upwards. And obviously as you start going years on, then it, yeah, below 90, I mean, I would typically wouldn't drill much below 90% anyway for a trial, but obviously commercially it's different. But yeah, when you start getting below 80, you don't know when you're going to get this. Beet doesn't, well, I will come on to this fact. Beet doesn't tiller, so you get 3 in a row that don't grow, you're going to end up with a patchy field. So yeah, I would start considering whether it's a viable option to drill it at that point when germ gets that low. You were very lucky then, weren't you? Yeah. Right. So, season pellets, speaking of, I do appreciate the questions. It is actually, it's nice to have the engagement, so I do welcome them. Thank you. So from a drill operator point of view, obviously Richard's touched on the RL and the bolting ESB warnings. In the last few years, you'll have seen a lot more different boxes coming onto farm. So typically, if I was talking to you 3, 4, 5 years ago, Germain's would have been supplying the whole market with their products. So it'd be one box, one label. However, the seed market is very much opened up in the UK, and you've now got all the breeders in the room essentially supplying their own pellets amongst others. So this was the seed order last year. And you can see all the different types along the top. But from an operator point of view, I wouldn't be too concerned. Essentially, it's just part of the package that you're seeing on farm. And it's, again, focusing on the variety, and some of the other warnings that Richard touched on are probably more important than the product itself. However, building on Richard's point of knowing what variety you've got where, a service that a lot of people don't realise BBRO offer is our SKU reference trials. So for every batch of seed sold in the UK, we drill them out in 2 trials across the growing area as a reference point for you as growers and for the breeders. So if there is ever an issue with seed, we have that batch that you've drilled yourselves in a trial site of our own, so we can go and do plant counts, plant assessments, etc., to see if we have the same problem or see if it's a localized issue for you. If you don't know what your SKU is, however, we can't go and check, and we can't support you or the breeder in whatever issue we're trying to resolve. So I would very much encourage you to know what SKU, what batch of seed you've drilled. My personal preference, using the wonderful smartphones that we all have, is taking a picture of the unit, ideally in the field you're drilling it, and then with the geotag, the date and time, and the picture, you've got all the information of where each seed product has gone. And should that then be a problem, it's just a case of looking through your gallery, finding that picture, ring us up or the breeder and say, oh, I'm seeing something I'm not used to, this is the one we drilled, and you've got everything. My one watch out is, take the picture before you open the box, because a lot of them have the tear through in the label, and then you might lose some key information. So ideally, take the picture first, then rip the box open and pour it in the drill, and away we go.
Could you go back the slide before about the seed thing? Could you just explain which ones work better than others?
I don't have that information. We have done pellet trials, and they are all to a standard. And equally, site interactions will be important. So for you, as you may develop a preference, whether it be how it flows through your drill, how it performs on your farm, but there is no there is independent testing. There is no significant data to point you towards which pellet would be best for you. They are very similar in performance. From the testing we've done as BBRO, the manufacturers, including Germain's, will have their own on-farm trials, and that's very useful. And obviously, that is localized information. So there are benefits and gains, but it's very seasonal and location-driven. So I wouldn't have an issue recommending any of them to you as growers and drill operators. Is that right, Mark? Right, so I'm an independent researcher. So Richard touched on the chemistry that is used on your seed. And yes, 99% of it's going to have the same package applied, whether it's in any of those forms of pellets. My other role at BBRO is health and safety, often known as Safety Steve. So I do just like to point out that you are using chemistry. Yes, it is pelleted and within the coating, but it's no different to you handling chemistry going into your sprayer. So I'd always definitely encourage the use of gloves. And if you're blowing out drills, etc., and you're creating dust, obviously just think of what is making up that dust. So dust masks, etc., are very much a strong suggestion. So just be aware, it does look like Skittles, but obviously they are carrying significant pesticides as well. So cultivations. Before I joined BBRO, I actually worked for a North American tillage and seeding company. So I had several years traveling, working on minimum tillage products, strip till, and a lot of row crops. Ironically, the one thing I didn't drill was sugar beet at the time, but anything from poppies, soybeans, corn, etc., etc. So some of this presentation comes from that time. Equally, when I joined BBRO, I was doing machinery research, so I was out with harvesters and drills, and again, that sort of builds up the information pack we've got. So Richard touched on it, but tillage can definitely go wrong for us. And back to Simon's quote of 70% of yield. Things like those two images obviously are going to have a huge impact. We're never going to be chasing big yields when we start like this. Having done several hundred harvester tests for losses, the thing that always came back was the quality of the crop in front of the harvester will have the biggest impact on how well it performs. And that's really what actually pushed us back to doing drill testing and drill training. If you put a gappy, unlevel crop in front of a beet harvester, the chances are your losses are going to be very high, and losses obviously relate to yield and profit return for that crop. So beet harvesters obviously getting more and more developed. We have more and more technology going into them, but essentially at the end of the day, it is a 3-meter rigid machine. And we either want those turbines or roller table close to the ground, and we want those shears to consistently flow through the ground, lifting those beet. However, if we're coming across ruts, if we've got unlevel cultivations and the machine starts moving, maintaining that consistency becomes more difficult and losses start to climb. So I always used to think if I ever did a harvester test and they weren't moaning about the drillman, it's because they were the drillman and they were doing both operations. So my advice to you as a drillman, if you get to talk to your harvester driver about how they want it, that would be a very good idea, and they'll be able to pass on whether it's how you lay out your headlands, how you do your scoots, round poles, ins and outs, etc. I would always advise it's a worthwhile half an hour sat on the seat with them just to see how they're getting on. So, talking of level seed beds, I am by no means a ploughing expert and will not pretend to be. Obviously, still a big part of sugar beet establishment. And again, my main concern, and I'm not going to be promoting a single bit of technology, whether it's Latin moldboards, crackers, presses. There are horses for courses, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what we want is a level finish. Whether it's ploughing or cultivation, aiming for a level seed bed is what we're always chasing with sugar beet and trying to make the next pass as easy as possible. I always used to get the question on farm about, can I min-till for beet? The question is very much, yes, you can. Equally, I wouldn't jump in both feet and change your whole system overnight to one machine. And the range, min-till is such a broad term, it could mean anything from a subsoiler to a straw harrow. And it's all about tailoring it to what you need. Do you need to release compaction? Do you need leveling action? Do you need a mixing action? How much residue can my drill deal with? So there's all these questions you have to ask yourself. So I'd always suggest doing parts of fields to break yourself into it, see how it performs, and then build it up from there as you gain confidence. So, same machine. This is where I used to try and get some crowd participation, but I won't. Same machine, two different promotional pictures, Googled it, they both came up. The one on the right-hand side, I'm pretty happy with the finish there. The one on the left, it looks nice. We've got lots of black soil. It's leaving a nice defined corrugation. But actually, if you look at the ridge that machine is leaving here, that really turns me off to that cultivation. Suddenly, my secondary machine has got to level out that whole ridge. Otherwise, that's going to be there all the way through to harvest. And if my harvester's not going in perfectly in line with that machine, it's going to be walking its way down the field, shears coming out the ground and into the ground, potentially losing beet, either through whole roots not getting into the machine, or it's cutting them off as it goes through the ground. So again, I will keep banging on this message the whole way through, keeping the seed beds level as we go. So talking about cultivation selection, subsoil and structure, we've all seen promotional pictures like this. So a tine going through the ground, loads of shatter, compaction relieved, everyone's happy, jobs are good. The reality is with sugar beet establishment, we might be looking to do this in the spring. Seed beds are drying in the spring and the subsoil is going to be wet. And that's where this picture on the far side comes in. So they've gone through with their base fertilizer, early spring, still wet. They think they've subsoiled out those wheelings, but you can see they've gone all the way through secondary cultivations, and we've had an impact on our establishment and therefore our yield of that beet crop. So putting a tine through doesn't necessarily mean you're relieving compaction. So two pictures of Philip, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, talking about soil structure. We've all got reasonably good at this, which is digging a hole to see where the compaction is. My plea is that we do this and look behind the machine, especially when we're in those more marginal conditions. Are we actually relieving compaction, or are we making it worse by having upward compaction as the tine just compresses soil up and smears it? So actually we're burning lots of diesel and we're achieving nothing, and potentially we're making the situation worse. And you might say, well, when do I get rid of it? Well, there's always a compromise in agriculture. We're going to have to decide, can we actually relieve that compaction now, or is it going to have to follow through into the summer and in the next crop? So very much, we typically have a very big reservoir of horsepower on farm now, and we're able to pull these machines, but it doesn't mean we should be. And we really need to be asking that question, are the conditions appropriate? And ideally, we're going to be taking that out in the autumn when soil conditions are drier and those tines can actually perform properly. Timing, again, building on that subsoiling in the right conditions. All practices have compromises, but again, my real point is timing is key. So this was someone that tried strip till for the first time, far too wet, but the demo machine turned up. We'll have a go. You can see that hasn't really performed. We haven't created tilth. We haven't relieved compaction. Ploughing, generally a very reliable process, but too wet again, and we've created ourselves quite a big headache there. And again, when we come around to those secondary cultivations, that's going to take a lot of horsepower and steel, and how much moisture is going to be left in that seed bed by the time we drill it. Again, that's what we get to here. Loads of clod, loads of dry. How are we ever going to seed sugar beet accurately and into moisture with that? So again, I would always consider, sometimes things go wrong. We have bad weather periods. We might do those primary cultivations when they're not ideal. But equally, have we taken every opportunity when it does dry out to get it closer to that sugar beet seed bed before the spring, before potentially moisture starts to go away from us? So can we press in the spring on a frost, late winter, to try and bring that closer to what we need? Again, a grower here often found themselves waiting for a beet contractor to turn up to drill their beet. Seedbed was drying away from them, so they actually rolled it all down to try and conserve moisture, and just things to consider to try and hold on to that. Right, before we come away from tillage, two of my pet hates with machinery: scrapers on the back of rollers not being adjusted and replaced, and clod boards on cultivators, whether primary or secondary. Probably the cheapest bit of wearing metal on a cultivator, and it's probably the last thing to get replaced. And again, if I'm thinking about a nice level seed bed for my drill and my beet harvester, these two can probably have one of the biggest impacts as cultivators lift out as they build up with soil, or clod boards are just spewing soil out the side. So big plea from me and pet hate is make sure they get adjusted or replaced as needed. Secondary cultivations, fairly simple principles I'm sure you're all familiar with. The question I always get, and we always like to think we can change it by changing machine, and yes, you can have an impact. So the question is, which one was always best? I don't have an answer. I can give a politician's answer again. They all have their place. My main consideration for you is how many passes do you need? So for me, really, I'm targeting one pass in the autumn, whether that's subsoiling, a cultivator or ploughing, and equally I want to be targeting one pass in the spring. I'm sure that's not possible for everyone, but if we target it, then we're aiming for it all the time. In a dry season, if we're doing multiple passes, every pass is loss of moisture. If it's a wet season and we're doing multiple passes, it's more wheelings. So whichever way you look at it, you lose. You're either drying it out or you're compacting it. So again, if we can get to one pass, then we're optimizing. And the other thing is efficiency of drilling. If you've got one cultivator and one drill, and the cultivator's got to do twice as much work, you're probably going to be slowing down your beet drill. So we want, as Richard said, we want to be targeting that narrow drilling window to maximize growth, maximize sunlight use. So if we can optimize the use of our machinery, we're going to be doing that as well. Short discs, I'm sure you're all familiar. They've gained massive popularity, primarily through stubble cultivations in the autumn, potentially getting a chit of blackgrass or residue management. Often used more and more in the spring now ahead of beet. A very effective tool, especially if you're in a high residue situation. So depending on your previous crop or potentially cover crop, obviously something like that is just going to act as a big rake. So we need to be switching over to something that can handle that residue. Couple of things, equally prone to wet conditions. Discs will smear in wet conditions, so we don't want to be doing that. And the other thing I always point out is disc harrows are designed to move soil from side to side. So we need to make sure if we're moving it one way, we're moving it back again. Because again, back to that, I want a level seedbed at the end. I don't want discs spewing it all one way and creating ridges in my field that I've then got to try and remove or I've got to cope with at harvest. Power harrows often branded the devil in the regen system and other advice. Again, I have no preference and I'm not saying you should be using them, but if I come back to my question of how many passes do I need in the spring, is one pass of a power harrow more effective than 2 or 3 of a combination harrow? And again, it's assessing that situation as it comes round. What's the moisture like? What's the seedbed like? How much intensity do I need to get myself to the seedbed I want? And potentially the power harrow is an option for you there. So, drilling. One thing I always have to remember and point out, especially to new drill operators coming into the industry, is beet is probably like nothing else you've drilled before, in that everywhere you put seed, the harvester will follow. They can't go across rows, they can't cut through rows. It's not a maize header, it's a beet harvester. So if you get it wrong, they're probably going to tell you about it 6 months later, that they don't like the way it's drilled. So again, I would always encourage, especially a new operator, go and have an hour on the harvester and see how they want things laid out. We invest a lot of money in accuracy with RTK, etc. And I'm sure, I used to ask for a show of hands, but I'm pretty sure you're all using RTK at this point. And again, it's just trying to, I always have that number in mind of the level of accuracy I'm looking for when I'm setting up a machine. And we just keep that in mind all the time. So, seeding objectives, building on what Richard's touched on earlier. Again, back to the combination harrow question, which one was best? We will get asked which drill is best, which one should I buy? This is completely unique to your situation. What is your crop rotation? What's your soil type? What are you trying to do? How much residue is going to be in your system? We probably have the widest range of drill technology available to us that we have for a long time. We have the likes of Tempo, we have the Matrix, we have, they're here, so we can build on that conversation later. Equally, deploying the wrong drill in the wrong situation can start taking away from our establishment, our populations. So again, it is choosing the right one, and I encourage you, you've got all those manufacturers here today, do take up that opportunity to talk through what you're trying to do and how their machine might fit into your system. Drill testing, so some of you might be running some older type machines, so a cell wheel machine, often potentially mechanical drive. This used to be something that was very much encouraged by British Sugar and earlier BBRO. So this was a belt test, so it would go off to your dealer. They would hang it up on a unit and spew out some seed and check your spacing along the belt. This is still available, and by all means talk to the manufacturers and dealers here. That is still available for you on those old machines. However, it's not always possible on some of the newer technology. Again, do ask the question of them, what do I need to be checking? They might be able to give you drawings, detailed drawings for the cell wheel, and you can get your verniers out and check that they're within spec. Equally, so again, I can't talk through them all, but I would encourage you to pick up that conversation with the manufacturer. So I touched on the fact I used to do drill testing. So this came very much off the back of harvester testing. So I used to go out and these were the things that I would record, and I'll sort of break them up now for you. So one thing I recorded, which I never thought would actually become a data set that I used, was the drilling against the target seed rate. And it was more just for observation, really. But what we actually found was that what the grower thought was being drilled in their field necessarily wasn't always what was being drilled in their field. And sometimes it was simple as the fact that contractors weren't being told what seed rate the grower wanted, so they left it the same all season, and then the grower was confused why they had seed left at the end. So again, just making sure you're communicating what seed rate you want based on the calculations and discussion Richard had earlier. But you can see here we had people down at 85%, nearly 85% of what they thought they were drilling. One, why have we ordered extra seed in that situation? And two, we're not going to get the plants down we were expecting from that. Establishment, something else I checked, and I was very relieved when my average came out at 84%, so that's very much in line with the bigger piece of work we used to do. And the only reason I really show this is this one here. So yes, you would expect 84% or around the 80 mark, but if you get that seed bed wrong, you can have a huge detriment on your establishment, and obviously that's going to have a massive yield impact, and it's probably going to fight you all the way through from weed control to harvesting. So we really need to be getting those things right. Just to summarize, so yeah, we typically had a 10% swing up and down of where seed rate people thought they were. So that's either making sure speed sensors were set right, or like I said before, just making sure the operator actually knew what seed rate they wanted in that field. I had a quite high level sensor with me, and I was testing in the seeding zone. It was part of a bigger piece of work looking at moisture in trench against plant counts or establishment, but I've left that out today. It's really difficult, and it's still a piece of work we're doing. Sometimes that you will then get secondary establishment, as Richard pointed out. But yes, sometimes that crack is enough. So we are then taking some of them away and trying to germ them again to see if they're still viable. So again, making sure it goes into moisture and stays in moisture is the key there, and I'll pick up on that in a bit. Tyre selection, like I said, we've now probably got the biggest diversity in beet drill technology we've had for a long time. I guess it used to be that we had 35 to 65 horsepower tractors on single row crops with a 12-row Stanhay drilling beet. Obviously, that isn't what we have in the shed here today. So suddenly, the tyre selection question gets a lot more difficult. Row crops are still an option on the lighter units, lighter tractors. However, as weight increases, having that narrow wheel can cause us a problem. If we create a rut, essentially between drill units, beet can start to grow inwards to them, and anyone that drives a harvest will know having diagonal growing beet doesn't help with lifting, so we really want to avoid that. First step, I guess, really is you go onto dual row crops to spread that weight further. Equally, some lighter soils, black soils, people opt onto the flotation tyres to really spread that weight, try and keep that compaction or rut as shallow as possible. But I am seeing more and more people running on a standard tyre, whether that's with central inflation, etc. But again, I would urge caution on how much weight we're putting through that and into the seeding zone. So why is it changing? Well, so we have a 12-row monopill coming at about 1,200 kilos. When we switch over to tempo, we're looking at potentially double the weight, if not triple, depending on spec. So again, we need to be carrying that weight differently and thinking about that. So whether it's changing our cultivations, firmer seed beds, less disturbance, or equally just the tire technology we use. If we have a bigger drill, we've probably got a bigger tractor. And I think I've been quite modest in what used to be a small tractor. But you can see we're now going from a 6-ton system, 7-ton system, up to in excess of 10 when we start changing. So we really need to be conscious of how much weight we have involved now. The other thing to bear in mind, especially as people move on to not changing their tire technology for drilling, is track spacing. If we're running, say, a 710, we could easily be running down 1 row or 2 rows. So again, changing your track spacing might help. If we've got a 12-row drill and we're running over 4, that's a third of our beet crop that's growing in a wheeling, which I think is quite shocking, really, when you think we've spent all this time and money getting the perfect seed bed, and then 30% of it is going to be rolled down by the drilling tractor in front of those beet plants. And you can see here, rows in undisturbed soil, perfectly fine, and then you see the wheeling of the tractor, and we've had a huge impact there. I'm not saying that's happening all the time, but that's one of the worst cases I found where that drill wheeling had a massive impact on that establishment, and you can see how bigger impact that has had.
How tire pressure to be not impacting the soil?
It's not just tire pressure, it's axle loads. Tire pressure will help, but ultimately it's axle load that is going to be the driver, and soil tension, etc., and how much it can carry. I mean, there's other things we'll pick up on track eradicators in a second. The point I missed there was, Richard did encourage you as drill operators to go and do your own plant counts. I'm very much an advocate of that, and if I was drilling a field, I'd want to be the one doing the plant counts. Not only do I want to be counting the good bit, I want to be picking up on stuff like this where it has gone wrong. So is it headlands, is it wheelings, what's bringing down my average, and equally what can I do about it next year in my setup to try and reduce that impact. A simple one that I always like to point out. So I used to ask questions, but I'll tell you now. So this operator, I was really delighted when I turned up. So it was a 12-row tempo with a FERT kit for drilling maize, but none of his beet customers wanted placement fertilizer, so they actually took the whole thing off. This one, so a nice lightweight 18-row Vicon, quite a large tractor, and equally we've still got wheel weight sat on there. So we've got an extra 600 kilos, which half an hour in the workshop, we could have dropped them off. And I'm not saying it's going to be life-changing, but it's all these little details that add up to maximize yield, and hopefully those 4 rows behind those wheels might have done slightly better, etc., etc. So if we are limited, we need a bigger tractor, we only have that bigger tractor on farm, the other option available to us is track eradicators. There is, again, like everything I've been saying today, there's a huge range of them available. The Grimmy over there has got some tines just to take out the tyre cleat. Equally, some of them have more aggressive tines that can potentially relieve some compaction. My only caution to you, that's not a fix-all, especially if soil conditions are wet. A tine will not relieve compaction, and equally you could make that seedbed worse by dragging it up and making large clods, etc. So it is an option. But again, there's no right or wrong answer, and you're going to have to experiment with that yourselves on farm and see what the manufacturer can provide for you. So the other thing I did as a drill test is I really wanted to understand drill coulter performance. So we talk about consistent seed depth, but how do I record that on a moving drill without digging up hundreds of seeds that takes hours at a time? So what we did is we purchased a 3D accelerometer and we attached it to different row units as I went out drill testing. So whilst it can do side to side, the main thing I was interested in up and down, like how much is that unit bouncing around as we're driving along, and how can I compare different setups, and hopefully it would give an insight, of which it did. So as we've been talking about wheelings a lot, so a unit, say on my wing, nothing running in front of it, is the green line. You can see that's fairly stable. If I then have the same unit behind a wheel of the tractor, you can see how big those accelerations are. So that unit is bouncing around. So either we need to try and smooth out the seed bed in front of it, or potentially we increase down pressure on the unit to try and hold it in the ground to maintain that consistency. So we're going to get that establishment that we're looking for. Again, another example there, and again, encouragement to say, go out and do those counts, see how they're performing in your wheeling, really understand that performance. If we come around to hitching up, we talked about that's a much younger me there, by the way. We talk about that RTK accuracy. How often do we back up to machine and hitch up? Are we always checking our check chains are square, our drop links are square? We really want that drill to be running like a billiard table. I think the worst drill call out I ever got to a drill that wouldn't run level was they actually had a flat tire on the drill and it was pulling sideways down the field and obviously compromising the performance of it. So just running a tire pressure gauge across the back of your depth wheels on the drill can pay dividends and avoid an embarrassing visit from me. Another one that might seem too obvious to check is actually just running a tape measure along the back of your drill between units. If it's been your drill on farm for a while, no doubt it's probably fine, but equally if it's new to you, or you've been switching between row spacings for different crops, it's always worth checking that they are lined up correctly. This situation was very unfortunate. It was an 18-row drill, had gone through a bad gateway, and it had twisted one of the bottom rows of units, so it was about 2 inches off where it should be, and they drilled several hundred acres like it, and the harvester really struggled to get that row of beet, basically because it was just off where it should have been in the 6 rows, and it was always fighting it. So you can see that cutting into the root, so not ideal at all. So if you're buying a new drill, you're converting between row spacings, do just double check that you have got that correct. GPS shut off, obviously a massive step forward and one of the main encouragements for electric drive, etc., and can save a lot of seed and hassle of hoeing. My advice to you as someone that used to do it is give yourself enough time to set it up properly. You probably want 2 of you for a half day, and equally actually ask the manufacturers, they might have more recommendations on what's best to do now. I might be slightly out of date. But if you rush it, and often the drilling season can catch us a bit unawares, even though it's always the same every year, we're not quite ready and we go out because conditions are right and it's going to rain at the weekend, you can end up with something quite unfortunate like this with a castellated headland where those timers weren't right to the tractor it had been hooked onto, and you can see it was shutting off late and shutting off too late and not turning on early enough, although it did make it easier for the harvester to see where to set in. But other than that, obviously not what we want on farm. Coulter wear, again, please talk to the manufacturers about their specific machines. Discs will wear just as equally as a Coulter type machine. Both need either adjusting or replacing, and we're aiming for that really crisp seed trench. We don't want a huge trench. We want it to be as crisp as possible so we can set that small seed into that nice strip of moisture. So keeping those adjusted or replaced is crucial. And again, please ask the relevant manufacturer what your settings should be. Seed firmers, probably more common on some of the maize type hybrid machines. Very useful for firming that seed into that moisture at the bottom of the trench, so very much a positive. However, if weather conditions like this carry on and we end up in a wet spring and we're drilling, I would urge caution. A finger type unit like this can be prone to smearing that trench, and the problem with that is we then can't close it in, especially if it then dries out. It can open back up and expose that seed, so that's a negative. And equally, the wheel type unit, if it starts to bung up, it can pick seed out of the trench or equally drag it along the trench. So that might be the deciding factor if it's go or no go on too wet or not. Drilling depth, I think picking up on Mark's question earlier about cracking of seed. Beet generally requires quite a shallow seed depth, so 25 to 30 mil is optimum, which really focuses your mind on how good that seed bed needs to be. Equally, we can go deeper, and we're pretty confident down to 5 centimeters. Beyond that, you're then putting strain on that seedling getting to the surface, and we start to be a bit more nervous. I would very much be looking at the weather forecast as well, to Mark's point. If I know I've got moisture coming, I'm confident to drill a bit shallower because there's more moisture coming into that seed bed. Equally, if I've got a dry forecast ahead, I might start looking at going deeper so that seed stays in the moisture. We don't want it to chit and then dry out because moisture will be dropping through the profile. So again, if we drop it further in, we might be able to buy ourselves a few days and help it establish better. Row unit down pressure. So this is one of the things available on these newer machines. We're now seeing it being introduced on some of the more conventional beet drills. Very useful tool. One, for making sure we can get that seed at the required depth. And if I was setting up a drill, I would always set up my target depth on my depth gauges, and then I adjust pressure up and up until I consistently achieve it with those coulters. There is a negative, however. If we apply too much down pressure, we can start causing compaction with the depth wheels that are holding the unit up. So these, if you can visualize on both machines to the side of us. If I've got too much force, I'm compacting this zone here, and we refer to that as sidewall compaction. Again, we've spent hours and lots of money creating a nice fine seed bed. The last thing we want to do is compact the exact zone where we're placing that seed that will become a small seedling, and potentially make it struggle to get through or down. Back to my accelerometer data in this situation. So if I'm going from a heavy end to a light end, you can see the heavy blue is obviously creating bigger spikes. So that might be an instance where we start to increase down pressure. And this is where the next generation of these drills with an active system, so it's always looking for that variation itself and in changing it on the go, can really pay dividends. And again, I would encourage you to ask the manufacturers what systems they offer in that situation. Equally, forward speed can have an impact. There is always an interesting conversation about how fast can I go with my beet drill. So the blue line is 8K, and the other line would be 6. So you might say, well, I'll slow down, but equally, we know what pressures there are on productivity. So again, it might come back to I'll keep going at 8, but I might look to increase my down pressure as long as it's within reasonable limits. Row cleaners, just touching on these. 2 different types. So obviously the conventional clod pusher, which you can see on some of these machines, or the rotary row cleaner. So these are primarily designed for residue. So they came from corn on corn, that sort of situation in the US, but equally can be useful in cover crop residue, etc. To Mark's comment again about drilling into moisture, if I'm concerned I've got a really dry forecast, I might want to be placing my seed even deeper. Now I can't actually drill as I said, I can't go deeper than 5 centimeters, but what I can do with these 2 systems is I can move soil to one side between the rows, and I can then actually, so I'm taking my seed deeper into the profile, but actually I've still only got 5 centimeters of soil above me, if that makes sense. So it allows us to find that moisture if we have dried out. My one caveat to that is don't then think, oh, I'll roll as well and conserve moisture with the rolls, because the roll's probably going to pull all that soil back into my trench, and then again my seed depth has gone from 5 to 10 centimeters, and my beet seed isn't going to make it through. So again, can be very useful, but in certain situations. Press wheels, really not too much to say on that. There is a variation. Again, it's a question I would suggest you pose to your manufacturer. If you're on silt, your big concern might be capping, so that might be your preference in press wheel design. Equally, on heavier soils, you might need it to consolidate more. So again, it's really a horses for courses question. And again, I'd put it to your manufacturer. Tram lining quickly, I'm sure we're getting to a very small percentage of drills that aren't tram lining on farm anymore. Obviously, there is a seed reduction, and also hopefully less losses with the harvester, etc., if we're running down rows in the old way. So generally, uptake has been very strong on this. As an operator, tram lining can be a challenge, especially if you're a contractor operating across a lot of different farms. I couldn't believe it when I turned up to this 18-row machine in Suffolk, and he had such a diverse range of sprayers that he was drilling for. He had to have a pre-emergence marker on every unit of the drill to accommodate every farm that he went onto. So that can be quite a head scratcher. And in a time-pressured season, as the operator, I'd want to know exactly what program and which units I need to be switching off for each farm. So I would say there's a bit of homework there if that is your situation. So if you're trying to beat a rain that evening, you're not sat on the headland trying to work out the rhythm you need so you can get drilling. So definitely some homework before the season kicks off. Placement fur, again, I could probably talk for a couple of hours on this, and I won't, because I think I'll lose you as an audience. Again, questions for the manufacturers. All of our work typically is with place fur, and by place we mean 5 centimeters across, 5 centimeters down. And we are pretty confident that it will work for you and that you won't have a negative impact through scorch on your seed. However, if people start talking about in a furrow application, that's when alarm bells start ringing for me that you need to be more careful with what that product is, what rate you're applying, what the conditions are. Typically, place fertilizer are very safe, and I don't know how many of you are doing it, but it's growing in popularity and we're doing more and more research on it. The other watch out is weight. Again, suddenly we're putting on 1,500 litre tanks on the front of tractors to supply fertilizer to our drill. Absolutely fine. But do just bear in mind the weight that you're adding on. This one is a case, a small row crop on the front of the tractor. Suddenly we've added 1.5 tons. And actually the rear wheels weren't compacting the soil, but the front wheels were. So it's just something to watch out for and managing that weight. Some fields, if it's wet, you might not want to be filling that hopper all the way full. Just bearing in mind that compaction. Drill hygiene. I started the day talking about hygiene on farm, and this is equally important, and Richard has already touched on it, but I will repeat it. Conviso seed. Let's have a show of how many of you have drilled smart varieties on farm? So we all understand what that's used for and how it works. So obviously that's a variety that is tolerant to a certain herbicide. Very useful tool for many reasons. One of them being weed beet. So we really don't want to be drilling conventional seed in a field that is destined for a Conviso herbicide, because you will look very silly the day it goes on, because all of that seed will die away. Equally, we don't want Conviso seed being drilled in fields we're not aware has Conviso. With Conviso, we really want to be managing bolters. We don't want weed seed going in. Not that we're not always concerned about bolters, but especially with Conviso. And I guess our message, and this is one of our plot drills, is the drill really empty? Especially if you're switching farms or fields a lot. With Conviso, I would really urge good drill hygiene, and just pulling the flap and letting the seed out might not be enough. There could still be several hundred seeds sat in the bottom of that unit. So take the disc off, double check, get to know your drill and what is left in that unit. Identifying that seed. So this was when it first launched, that the inner colouring of the Conviso seed from KWS was purple. That is the fail-safe, I guess. But my advice to you as operators is, if you're taking Conviso seed out of a drill, please put it back in the original Conviso box so it is clearly labelled as to what it is. And I would generally urge that for all varieties. Put it back in the box it came from so you don't start getting mixes and seed lost on farm. And then a year later, you're scratching your head of, is it what I think it is or is it something else? So we always want to know what we're drilling out. So, happy to take a few questions. Whether you want to do it as a group, or equally, I'll be floating around all afternoon, as is Richard, so please grab us if there's anything specific you want to talk to us about.